Hello and welcome to Meetings in Zoomland, the Brown Act, the Green Act, and you. This is Natasha Beery. I'm the Director of BSEP and Community Relations for the Berkeley Unified School District. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is California's open meeting law. Many of you may have heard of the Brown Act, which came about in the early 1950s when there was an expose in the San Francisco Chronicle about meetings that were being conducted in secret, meetings that had to do with public business and public funds. So in 1953, the Brown Act, named after Ralph Brown, was created, which insisted upon certain forms of conduct for public meetings so that decisions could be seen by the public and engaged with by the public. And essentially what it distills to is that meetings, public meetings that have to do with so-called the people's business. Another way this is talked about is legislative bodies, basically groups that are making rules, making laws, or deliberating on the expenditure of public funds. They need to make those meetings open and public. They need to provide notice that the meetings are taking place. The meetings themselves need to be conducted in such a way that the deliberations and decisions are seen publicly. And the public must be able to not only attend the meetings, but be able to make comment at some point during the meeting. Furthermore, it's important to have the agendas not only posted in advance, but clearly kept to, so that anything that the meeting is going to be talking about will have been given notice on a prior agenda. So what does that mean for you if you're a member of a school site council or the P&O or the Parent Advisory Committee? Are you subject to the Brown Act? Well, you're subject to a version of it. There is something called the Green Act. Just coincidentally, there are some colorful people that have given their names to these public acts. And what happened was the Brown Act, while it made sense to apply to things like school boards and city councils, was somewhat intimidating for folks who were stepping up as volunteers to serve on committees that involve parents and school staff, for example. The Local Control and Accountability Fund that brought out the Parent Advisory Councils or committees is an example of this. And it was decided that we really needed something that was still holding to the idea of keeping publicly accessible meetings, but making it a little less frightening for someone to attend that may be worrying about, am I in violation if I talk about something with a committee member that is also a parent and we carpool, does that count? So here's what the Green Act says. You still need to have open meetings. Very important that any decisions that you're making about public funds, and so that includes, say, your school site funds, need to be held publicly, and there needs to be clear notice given in 72 hours, just like with the Brown Act, in fact. You need to post an agenda, and you also need to include opportunities for public comment. You need to be sure that people can access your meetings, hold them in a place that's physically accessible. At least that was the case when we were in the pre-pandemic world. And the records of your meetings also need to be accessible. And they need to be not only accessible, but clear as to what your decisions were. You need to not record every single detail, but at least record your decisions, make it clear when you're expending funds, what it is you're going to do with the funds, how exactly those funds are going to be used, which funds are going to be used. But then, what about now? What about during shelter in place? Well, some changes were made to the rules for the Brown Act, and it's generally understood that the Green Act is interpreted the same way. The Brown Act, by the way, is a California act, so it was Governor Newsom who made an executive order early on in the pandemic that it wasn't made sense for us to be able to do things that we weren't doing in the pre-pandemic world, which is allowing people to basically telecommute, to call in, not be physically present in a meeting. So that is permissible. However, you still need to be public and visible about what you do. So if you're voting, that needs to be seen and heard. You need to provide public access, so share that Zoom link. You still need to include public comment. You still need to be sure that you're providing adequate notice, so 72 hours ideally. The only exception is for emergencies. And then if there are accommodations that need to be made to make it possible for someone to attend, for example, to call in rather than to use their computer, that needs to be made as well. And then in addition to those sort of Brown Act, Green Act concerns about ensuring that you're following those rules, you of course also want to be sure that your meetings are make sense to your community, that they are engaging, that they are include agenda items that are going to be informative. So you want to be sure that you are not only providing that 72-hour notice and making sure that you're not just inviting your committee members, but your entire community, your school site council, or if it's a district community committee, you need to be sure that everybody knows about it. And hopefully there's something that's of interest to just about anybody, that you're going to have some presentations that are not just going to be reviewing budget reports, but are going to be talking about programs, for example. And you're going to make those committee meetings much richer if you ensure that you have multiple voices there, you're interconnecting people from across other committees, other communities, that you're also including, for example, the voice of affinity groups, or you may be holding separately some focus groups. If you're making a decision about the expenditure of public funds, you're not just speaking to the people who show up at meetings, but you're really reaching out and being sure that you're including folks who you may not usually hear from. And you may find other ways to reach out. You might be conducting site surveys or polls, or a really good way to do it is show up where people are already showing up. So you have a school event, whether it's a real world event like we used to have performances, or maybe an online performance, and you ask people to stick around before or after and provide some feedback on something of interest. So now that we've had a quick overview, I'm going to give you a little quiz and ask you whether you think some of the following situations conform to the Green Act. Would it be okay, do you think, to rearrange the order of items on an agenda? Let's say a presenter is running late, or maybe something is just not ready for prime time. Can you take it off the agenda? What do you think? Yes, it is possible. You can rearrange or even omit, but you need to do that at the outset in the meeting and actually vote as a committee to rearrange the agenda. But what about another situation? What about adding something to the agenda and it's urgent? Can you do that? Yes, but with a caveat. It really has to be a genuine emergency. It can't be, oh, we forgot to put it on the agenda. It needs to be something that is on the agenda because you have to take action in a perhaps unforeseen situation. You are allowed, in fact, under such situations, to call an emergency meeting. You've got some deadline for expenditure of funds, and you need to call an emergency meeting to make the decision. You still need to make public notice. But it's really important here that you understand that the point here is that the public needs to know and have the opportunity to hear what the decision is and to make public comment. It's one thing under the first situation, if somebody is attending a meeting that they're interested in a particular topic and that topic they're interested in is now item 3 instead of item 1. Well, they're going to have to wait a little longer, or the item was removed. Okay, they can leave the meeting. But it's another thing to have something in the agenda that people could have given comment to, and you didn't give them notice. So that's really a different situation. What about in terms of the agenda, somebody in public comment makes reference to something that's not on the agenda. They want to talk about the bus service, and you weren't going to be talking about that on the agenda. You were going to be talking about plans for school nutrition. Well, if somebody in public comment brings up something about bus service and it's not on the agenda, and you may not have the people there who you want to have respond to that anyway, you can certainly make a bit of a response, simply to acknowledge the concern, but to engage in an actual discussion would be a violation of the Brown Act or the Green Act. So you can say something like, that is an important issue. Let's put that on our next meeting, and I'll be sure to have the right people there to talk about it. What about going back to public comment? Is it okay to limit people? I get this question quite a bit, and the answer is yes. But you need to provide equal time. You can't give one person 2 minutes and another person 5 minutes. An exception to that, you may have seen it in school board meetings, is that you may have one rule for individual public comment. So generally in a school board meeting, depending on how many people are speaking, 2 to 3 minutes per person. And then a committee member who's speaking to the school board might be given 5 minutes because they're representing that group. But generally the idea is equal time, and 2 to 3 minutes is kind of the norm. What about we're all busy people. It's hard to get all the work done in a meeting. We've got these great online tools. Can you put together an online doc and have everybody kind of work on it? We're going to write this school plan together. Let's collaborate on it. We don't have to spend meeting time on it, and then we can vote to approve it. We can agree upon it and then vote to approve it later. Well, no. Because what you've done is you've taken your deliberations out of the public eye. Now, there's a caveat here too, which is you might be able to have a work group kind of do some preliminary work, but if it gets to the point that the entire committee is looking at this and you're essentially engaging in a discussion out of public view, not okay. What about minutes? Can they be kept very brief? Do we really have to include all the gory details? Well, they can be kept very brief, but you need to be sure that you record decisions, actions. You don't have to say who voted or who said yes, no, abstain, but you need to have the numbers. And here's another little note, which is if you've recorded the meeting, an audio recording or a video recording, that is actually a public record and you do need to keep that around. And we do get those requests. So make sure your minutes are accurate. That may actually suffice. Last point here, and that is about what does it look like in Zoomland, the Green Act. So you've got non-committee members coming to the meeting for public comment. Is it okay to mute them during the meeting? Yes, but you need to have provided that public comment period. Now, what about, you've got some issue people are not agreeing on, it's really tough. We've got apps that we can use, say, in the Zoom environment where you can just set up a poll and you could just conduct that straw poll. Would that be okay as long as every committee member is, or at least you've got a quorum and they're all able to vote? Is that okay? Nope, because you violated the public nature of the vote. So please avoid that temptation. And last question. What about these great breakout rooms that we can have? Can we put people into separate breakout rooms, have those discussions, and then get back and report consensus? Yeah, maybe. That is, again, kind of like the work group idea. They cannot be voting. They can't be, making a decision to go one way or another if this is a deliberative body. The vote really has to be public, and this really isn't the ideal way to go about it. I'm sure you have other questions, other suggestions. Danielle Perez and I are here at bsep@berkeley.net. If you have questions about how your committee is running, concerns, suggestions, please contact us. And thanks for the work that you do on behalf of the community.